popular if you know music compositions. And the shaker furniture, you probably are familiar with it. You should know it's called shaker cabinets or shaker chairs. If you have a kitchen table with like chairs that kind of have a very thin, like carved arch at the top, and then thin spindles, you know what I'm talking about? Those are called shaker chairs. Okay. When I redid my kitchen, I actually put in shaker cabinets. Okay. Those are the style there is like very simplistic. Just you know, think a cabinet door like that, and then like a thick border, but nothing, like no designs on it. It's just a, you know what I'm talking about? Shaker cabinets. Okay. So those are some, you know, like the furniture, that's how they really made money so they could sustain economically, you know, their lifestyle. Now, again, they were hostile to materialism. Okay. Now, here's the thing that makes them, you'll see a lot of utopian communities have some type of unique rule, if you will. Okay. So y'all know that maybe you're part of a certain denomination or church because your parents were, and it's like a generational thing. Okay. Well, they wanted this, the Shakers did not want you to join it because your parents joined it. This was a commitment. Okay. So if you were a Shaker, you had to vow to abstain from sex. Because they, again, like there will be no generations to have to join it because of the parents. So what will happen to the Shakers eventually? Yeah, they'll die out. Okay, and I think to this day there might be like 6 Shakers in America. Kid you not? Okay, but it's just the idea of this is the commitment. Okay, they did believe that God had female and male components, so hence that gender equality. Okay, and again, Shakers will live outside of, they have their own little commune, if you will, in New York. So they are part of a religious utopian community or society. Okay, so now we're going to the last page of chapter 10. It says women's rights. Okay, and the rise of feminism. Okay, want to point out, if you're a feminist, it does not mean you think that women are better than men. A feminist means that you should have the same rights as men. Okay, so this is this first wave of feminism in America. Okay, now before we get to the first wave of feminism, let's talk about some pre-context to this first wave of feminism. Okay, y'all remember late 1700s, we need women to take on a new role, to teach their children about the ideals and fundamentals of the American Revolution so they can be the best virtuous citizens they can be. A woman now, the mothers get to do this opportunity. What is that called? People online, help us out. We're blank here in person. Yes, Republican motherhood. Good, Emily and Lucas. Okay. So it's the idea that women, you get to do this. So a lot of people like just embrace it, okay? And this will lead to something called the cult of domesticity. When we talk about antebellum, remember antebellum means before the Civil War. What most women and men refer to as like the women's role is called the cult of domesticity. If you break it down, domesticity, think domestic, think the home. Okay, this is not a derogative term. I think today in 2020, a lot of radical feminists would say, oh, cultural domesticity is horrible. But again, this is like a woman, this is your place. Aren't you lucky that you get to like guide your children and provide in the home? Okay, it's called the cult of domesticity. That's what we talk about in the 1800s. Okay, now breaking it down from the cult of domesticity, there's something called, and I'm skipping a little bit. Well, no, I'm not. I'll get to that. Separate spheres. The public sphere is, you know, the husband, the breadwinners. They're the ones who see people in public. They're the ones with the jobs, okay? The private sphere, meaning the home, that's the woman's sphere, and that is where you get to make the biggest impact on society and your family. That's, you know, how it's kind of said. And again, when we talk about the cult of domesticity, it's about embracing that private sphere of the home. Okay, piety, meaning like give charity, like teach charity to your children, teach purity to your children, The next one, submissiveness. Okay, part of that Republican motherhood and that cult of domesticity is being submissive to your husband, who is the breadwinner. Okay, and then domesticity, meaning making sure the house is clean, the children are being taken care of, that kind of stuff. And if you look here in yellow, it says Godey's Ladies Book. It's Godey. That was actually like a magazine. It's kind of like Women's Home Journal Today or Southern Living Today. This was like a best-selling magazine that was all about lifting up that cult of domesticity. The fact that this is a huge, popular, like bestseller magazine in the early 1800s shows you that that cult of domesticity is basically like being praised. Okay. Only a small amount of women want to get rid of that separate spheres theory and stuff. Okay. All right. So let's talk about this. First, we want to point out we have the Grimke sisters. Okay. We already talked about them. They're the ones where they were Southern and then they left because they felt like their parents were not going to go to heaven because of the slavery and all that. Okay. You will see, okay, that most feminists were involved in another reform movement, got denied participation in that reform movement in some aspect, and they realized people don't respect women, hence now they're involved in the women's suffrage movement or women's rights movement. Okay, I want to point out that more women were actually supporting the temperance movement. Okay, second place though would be the abolition movement. Think about it. Are a lot of Southern women going to support the abolition movement? No. Okay, so overall in all of America, more women promoted temperance. Okay, up north, there's definitely a lot more abolition. Okay, all right. And Angelina, Sarah wrote letters on the condition of women and the equality of the sexes, and basically saying, hey, women and men are equal. Okay. You also have Margaret Fuller, which we'll talk about her more in chapter 11. She was a feminist, and she also was a transcendentalist, and she was a newspaper editor. So that's pretty cool that here's this woman who's one of the first big newspaper editors. So she's definitely challenging gender norms. Lucretia Mott, M-O-T-T, okay? She was a Quaker, and she went to this World Anti-Slavery meeting, okay? And she went to enter the building, and the people turned her away. She wasn't allowed to speak, hence not even go to the meeting. And she was like, why? I'm against slavery. And they said, but you're going to take up a man's spot, and a man can actually do something, meaning like suffrage, vote. And so that she snapped. The reason why she snapped is she realized women want to do good, but they can't because they don't have suffrage. Okay? So Lucretia Mott, an influence of the Quakers. Okay? Remember, the Quakers believe in gender equality, even in the 1600s. Lucretia Mott, okay, and a woman named Elizabeth Cady Stanton, okay, they're the two planners. Because of the experience being rejected at that world, anti-slavery meeting, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton will plan the first women's rights convention. Please circle 1848. You do need to know that year. And what was the name of the meeting? At the location, Seneca Falls. It's in upstate New York. Okay. And this is where they basically say, look, we're going to take the Declaration of Independence. We're going to edit it and call it the Declaration of Sentiments. And we are going to come up with resolutions for our women's rights movement. Okay. And they, again, it's modeled after the Declaration of Independence. Okay. And I'll show you here. They take aspects of the Declaration of Independence and throw and women are created equal. It says he has taken all right and property, even the wages she earns. Okay. And then there's all these resolutions that's modeled after the Declaration of Independence. Resolve that it is the duty of the women of this country to secure to themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise, meaning suffrage, the right to vote. All the things they want are in this bulleted list. Okay. But think about gender equality. That is a huge idea, right? We need to break it down. What is step one? They know that they can't get like owning property and all that kind of stuff until they get past step one. So they determine what will be step one, women's suffrage. Once they get women's suffrage, then they'll focus on like career stuff. Does that make sense? So women's suffrage is the main thing there. Frederick Douglass attended the Seneca Falls movement. Okay, there were men who did support equality of the sexes. Okay, and again, letter B is going to be woman suffrage. Suffrage means the right to vote. Okay, and they also will blatantly vote to reject the separate sphere theory. Okay, saying that cult of domesticity, they say, while some women have the option to embrace it, we're saying that it's not expected. We reject the expectations. Okay. So let's talk about some examples. We have Lucy Stone. Okay. Y'all know that when women get married, they tend to get rid of their maiden name, or maybe it becomes their middle name. Okay. She was the first woman who like publicly said, I'm keeping my maiden name, and like told everyone about it. And so that's Lucy Stone. And people who wanted to follow her were called the Lucy Stoners. Interesting. Elizabeth Blackwell. Okay, she was one of the first famous like female physicians. She was rejected from 20 medical schools solely because of her gender. Okay, so she definitely broke some barriers there. 3. Quakers. Okay, and then you have Roman numeral 7, Amelia Bloomer. She pushed gender norms through a fashion statement. Y'all know antebellum America, especially down south, you have the hoop skirts, right? Up north, you didn't have as many of the hoop skirts, but you still had long skirts. You did not show your wrists, you did not show your ankles, okay? Amelia Bloomer wanted to wear pants like men. Okay, so this was risky for the time, but that is a picture of Amelia Bloomer right there. Okay, you see she's wearing a skirt which is not all the way down, so that's pushing the gender norms. And the fact that you can see her legs, like that was frowned upon by a lot of traditional women, because it's like you should not be seeing a girl's legs, so then you don't think of like, oh, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so she is pushing it, and so this is where we get the word bloomers. That was her fashion statement, how she pushed the norms too. Okay, what's going to happen though is that slavery is going to overshadow women's rights. Okay, women will align themselves with the abolition movement. They said, look, if we push for, like their plan of attack was, if we help get rid of slavery, and then like African Americans get the right to vote, why don't we just, if we help, they probably was like do the coattail effect where we'll get the right to vote too. Is that what's going to happen? No, in 1870 is when African American males federally get the right to vote. It'll be 50 years later, 1920, when a woman will get the right to vote federally. Okay, so that did not happen. So, democratic ideal address for this reform movement, I say there's definitely two. First one's pretty obvious, equality. Wouldn't you say so? Like being equal, okay? And then I would also say liberty, the freedom to go to medical school, or the freedom to wear pants or bloomers, the freedom to keep your maiden name, okay? Because again, all those things were frowned upon because society expectations, okay? Okay, and we have one last major reform movement, penitentiaries and asylums. What's a penitentiary or an asylum? So it's like a mental institution today, okay? Dorothea Dix is from New York, okay? She's a Sunday school teacher. And you know, lots of churches, and Second Great Awakening, want to go and volunteer somewhere, whatever, okay? She goes there and she is horrified at what she sees, okay? So, if you have a mental illness, if you are a criminal, if you're a debtor, okay, you are all just in the same place. We're talking women, children, whatever, all in the same place, locked, like chained to the walls and floors. You're just sitting there rotting away, okay? She felt that these humans are not being treated like their natural rights are being denied, basically, of life and liberty and all that kind of stuff, okay? And she felt like these people deserved better. They deserve to be treated like humanely, okay? So she will go to different state legislatures, okay? So that's the blank there. And again, starting with New York, her state, okay? And she decides, and what's the problem, letter A? They're kept all in the same harsh prisons, okay? So what does she do? She says, step one, legislature of New York, have different facilities for the person. If it is a criminal, prison. If it's someone with a mental illness, asylums or penitentiaries. Let's just go ahead and get rid of debtor's prison. Like, you know, we make mistakes financially sometimes, okay? So they will listen to her and like establish, okay? Also, like in prisons and stuff, have men and women separated, okay? But it's the idea of, you know, if you're a criminal, there's a certain way to handle that. And if you have a mental illness, there's a certain way to handle that. And they're not the same. Does that make sense? And so the fact that you're separating I guess you could say mental patients, that's going to help them out because they can find what the problems are and take care of them and treat them more humanely, okay? And again, I told you how debtor's prison will slowly be eliminated thanks to this. A new model that she establishes is called the Auburn system, okay? And this is an experiment for prisoners, okay? So this is the idea of let's separate the genders of, you know, have a female prison, male prison. Let's also give them tasks to do. Instead of just rotting away chained to the floor or wall, let's give them a task, okay? And so they'll be productive, okay? Let's also have time for them to maybe volunteer, like clean up and things. And let's also make sure that churches go and teach them Bible school stuff, okay? Then every day it'll be like a solitary confinement, but not like today where it's like a punishment. It's like, you know, there's people would encourage you, like as you're about to go to sleep, reflect on how you were a good contributing member of society. Like whatever your task was that day, like own it. Like it's like how efficient, effective you were. You know, how have you improved? How have, you know, it's like this like little checklist that they would like read. And they would realize the plan is that when you leave prison after your, you know, all that, you served your time, you would leave a better person, a better citizen than when you were going into the prison. And it was quite effective. Okay, so for me, the democratic ideals here would be like life, as in like life, like safety, but also justice, because these humans should be treated with justice, with fairness. Okay, last big thing, and we'll go more detail with this, chapter 11. So I'm just going to kind of like glide through the questions. If there's a question about this on the quiz, it's not going to be too nitpicky. It's overall, okay? Want to point out a transcendentalist. If you're a transcendentalist, you believe in like self-reliance and like discovery of whatever the truth is based off of your experiences. So you wouldn't be okay with someone saying, well, the Bible says to do it, or this is how we've always done things with the law. You'd be like, no, that doesn't make sense, okay? You believe that it's like self-discovery. You find the truth through your own experiences, even if that means being emotional, going out to nature to like, you know, get a clearer mind, okay? They have little regard for dogma, okay? Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau are probably the two main transcendentalists you need to know, okay? And again, they're jaded with American society, and a good bit of transcendentalists will leave and go live in utopian communities for a little bit. Because again, if you join a utopian community, you usually have a complaint of why you want to live in mainstream America. So now let's talk about utopian communities. This is an area where you create your perfect society. That's like an alternative society, okay? So you have Brook Farm, you know, in Massachusetts. This is where everyone did like the shared labor, like everyone worked. Some people like Nathaniel Hawthorne will leave because he didn't like doing the work. New Harmonies in Indiana, you have Robert Owen, and it will also fail eventually. Oneida is the one that you probably need to know. It's in New York. They believe their big thing was complex marriages. Everyone was married to everyone, regardless of gender or age. See that utopian, maybe that was frowned upon in America, so they create their own utopian society in New York. And how did the Oneida or Oneida utopian community make their money? Flatware, Okay, and like Dillard's and Belk and stuff, you can still purchase. Like, the United Community's not around now, but like the stuff they found, like, is still around, like the actual things, like the silverware. And so yeah, you can buy that. So it might be a nice little conversation at the dinner table if you realize that your flatware says Oneida on it. Then the shakers we've already talked about, definitely utopian community. And then I put Mormons with a little asterisk, because again, they are a product of the Second Great Awakening, but because they like fled persecution and created a safe haven in Utah, they also match the definition of a utopian community. Okay, and then synthesis, don't worry too much about that. We'll get to that. Yeah, so again, transcendentalism, it's, you're self-reliant, you like spiritual, your senses, emotions through the truth, not just because of like doctrines and tradition. There's Ralph Waldo Emerson, okay, who was the mentor for Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau is probably the best example of a transcendentalist, because he didn't just talk about going against society. He actually like challenged society. He actually did actions. Like, for instance, he lived in the middle of the woods. He spent about $28, built a little shack, and lived on Walden Pond. And like, he literally was like, I'm over this, and like created his own little utopian shack. Okay, there's lots of things. Okay, so that is it for chapter 10. What I'm going to do, there's a gym kit. I'm going to do it for 5 minutes. Okay, a 5-minute chapter 10 part 2 gym kit. And it is for bonus points for tomorrow's quiz. Okay, 15615.